BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast. A new trade deal is signed with India, which could mean increased exports of lamb, whisky and salmon. But some fear imports of food which might not meet UK standards.
I think that there's actually a better balance of offensive interests for UK farmers to take advantage of in the agreement than worry about what's coming into the UK. So there's a lot more wins, I think, for the agricultural sector than what we've seen in previous agreements.
We'll have the details a little later. First, a select committee of MPs is urging the government to do more to encourage private investment in schemes which restore nature. The report by the Environmental Audit Select Committee says new regulations should be introduced to enable landowners to realise their natural capital while protecting the farmers' ability to grow food. In particular, it says there should be more support for biodiversity net gain, a system where new developments must lead to increased biodiversity, done on the development site itself, delivered somewhere else, or buying credits from the government as compensation. Labour MP Toby Perkins chairs the committee.
I think that we should encourage investment in this field, but it's important that government makes sure that people can have confidence that we're actually going to get the nature recovery that we need.
But what regulations should the government be working on to avoid greenwashing by companies investing in things like biodiversity net gain?
Well, I think it's a crucial question. I think what we need to see is that government have a proper, often through local authorities, a proper mechanism in place to make sure that biodiversity net gain is delivered. And one of the recommendations that we've made is that they need to work to support local authorities to be better able to actually assess whether biodiversity net gain has been delivered, because there are many local authorities that don't even have an ecologist employed. And so in realistic terms, there may well be situations where developers have promised to do nature recovery, but haven't actually delivered, and no one's assessed that. So I think that fear that you have is one that we fear already, not necessarily as a future problem. And that's about making sure that local authorities and the Environment Agency are properly resourced to make sure that nature recovery is delivered.
How should funding to improve and invest in natural capital fit in with the land use framework, which is out for consultation at the moment?
Well, it needs to do, and we very much welcome that there is a consultation on a land use framework, something that's been called for a long time. The government are very committed to getting growth. We understand that. And what this natural capital approach will ensure that the growth that the government sees doesn't come at the cost of nature, but actually enhances nature hand in hand.
Your report does say, doesn't it, that you're disappointed that natural capital hasn't actually sort of appeared in policy across government. So is this a missed opportunity at the moment, do you think?
I think there's a danger that it is. I think that biodiversity net gain is very much in its infancy. We need to see that landowners, farmers are able to create opportunities for investment. We need to see financial markets being able to take advantage of these opportunities, and we need to see government in all its decision making having nature at the heart of that decision making. So if it doesn't do that, then growth could come at the expense of nature, and it really doesn't need to.
And also, what about protecting food security? I mean, there's so much pressure on land, isn't there, from different areas, but farmland is there to grow food, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. Food security is crucial, and we need a land use framework that clearly lays out, where are good places for nature restoration and where are good places for food production, and making sure that we have a more strategic approach from the top of government and right through all of our local areas to ensure that we achieve both food production and nature restoration.
Chair of the Environmental Audit Select Committee, Toby Perkins. Now, this week we're digging up all you need to know about the potato. It remains very much a staple part of our diets. The amount of fresh potatoes we eat, though, has dropped dramatically since the 1970s. But the amount of processed spuds has risen, and today they account for around 70% of consumption. I suspect that must include my downfall, crisps. But if you're buying fresh, one thing that hasn't changed is our preference for a nice-looking potato. Many never make it to our tables because of bruising and discoloration. Bob Walker's been talking to producers in Lincolnshire, where scientists are hoping that gene editing can produce a bruise-resistant spud.
This is our biggest fresh site here at Branston, site at Lincoln. There are 10 packing lines in this factory, doing everything from new potatoes all the way through to sweet potato at the far end. My name is Simon Spink and I'm head of seed here at Branston.
And I notice on the packing line you've got a sign up, is this the right quality? If in doubt, stop.
Ultimately, consumers buy with their eyes. It's the most important thing that we do.
My name is Mark Wilcox. I'm Agronomy Director here at Branston Limited. We process around 380,000 tonnes of potatoes every year. Potatoes are still, side of plate carb on 3 out of every 7 meals, but people are frustrated that they're often bruised when they get them home, and it's still a top 3 customer complaint.
So people are genuinely put off from buying potatoes if they're a little bit bruised?
Yeah, waste in the home is quite high with potatoes, and peeling off those sort of black bits is frustrating to people, and it will be one of the reasons that people trade out of potatoes into rice and pasta, which of course we're competing with. On the grower side, there's about 14,000 hectares of Maris piper alone grown every year, which is a particularly bruising variety, and typically around 5 to 10% of that Maris piper crop will be downgraded in some way, shape or form, or in some cases written off, and bruising is a big factor in that. Also, the after cooking discoloration, so that generates waste in the supply chain. So eradicating that will bring down cost for consumers as well as improve quality.
This isn't just about discoloration, is it? It's also about being able to cook a potato quicker. Why is that important?
Well, there are benefits again for consumers and for processors. If you're spending 20 minutes to boil a potato, and you've got to peel it first, of course, and then make mash with a further process, that's quite a lot of time compared to rice and pasta, which is simpler. With processors, again, if you're spending 5 or 6 pence a kilo to cook your product in your factories, if that could be 3 or 4 pence a kilo, that's a big cost saving every year. So again, it enables us to make high quality, food safe, but very cost effective products and pass on those savings to consumers.
Good morning. My name is Vidyanath Gururajan. I am CEO of Beehive Innovations. We are a commercial R&D company based in Lincoln Science and Technology Park in Lincolnshire. The project's called TuberGene. In the process of gene editing, we just mutate a particular gene that we identify to be the cause of the problem.
And how far have you got?
We have identified the right genes, we have identified the right cause and effect, therefore traits, and we are now in a position to act on those to create a gene-edited potato. Conventional variety breeding will take at least 10 to 15 years. What gene editing allows us to do is being more precise in trying to get to that in a quicker way.
When can we expect to buy a potato which is resistant to bruising and we can cook more quickly?
Once the gene edit comes through, and that's about another year's work, and then it's the usual propagation of 3 to 4 years to create a variety.
There is that perception among certainly some consumers that there isn't a lot of difference between gene editing and genetic modification. So there is a bit of work to be done there, isn't it, on public perception?
That's where the government and the wider supply chain will need to work harder to educate the end consumers and why it is important for consumers to understand the difference between GE and GM.
That report from Bob Walker in Lincolnshire. A former government trade advisor says the new trade deal with India could be good news for UK farmers. The deal comes after 3 years of negotiations and includes reduced tariffs on exports of products including whisky, lamb and salmon. It's been welcomed by the Association of Independent Meat Suppliers, which represents UK abattoirs. It says it's excellent news for lamb processors. However, some campaigners have raised concerns about the standards of some Indian food production, especially in relation to pesticides. Ali Renison is director of SEC Newgate Consultancy and a former trade and business advisor to the government. I asked her what UK farmers could get out of the deal.
Well, interestingly, I think India is one of those markets with some caveats that actually farming has more, potential export opportunities for what they produce than import sensitivities. So we know that, in some sort of sectors, obviously, particularly in, fresh meat, fresh produce, lamb is a particular offensive interest for the UK. Obviously, the beef market is limited in India because obviously the cow is sacrosanct. But, broadly, I think that India is a more kind of interesting export market for what farmers produce than defensive sensitivities on what gets brought in.
We also know that whisky is a big export from here, isn't it? And the tariffs are going to change, apparently. Is that right?
Yeah, so the government has announced there's going to be a significant reduction in the whisky tariffs that India has. Obviously, they make it's upwards of sort of 100% for a number of sort of spirits in the whisky trade. India is a very protected market. I think there's a big question about how quickly those tariff cuts actually are put into place, because that will determine how rapidly really kind of, the drink sort of sector in this country can take advantage of the free trade deal.
What might we see from India then coming into the UK?
Well, there's a whole host of, I think, areas where, there was some concerns about, Indian exports. India has an offensive interest in exporting not only its some of its fruit, but also in the rice sector, because there are actually some historically, once upon a time, Indian-owned rice mills that now operate in the UK. And I think that there was some competitive interest from producers here about, what were some of the standards that were going to be attached and relaxed, if any, in the free trade negotiations to allow those to be exported more easily here.
Indeed, and actually Pesticide Action Network, which campaigns on reducing pesticides in food, claimed in a recent report that, and I'll quote them, Indian apples and grapes are both permitted to contain 200 times the amount of insecticide malathion than their UK equivalents. Now, we haven't been able to verify that specifically, but does the deal touch on concerns with standards coming from India into the UK at all?
I think, while we haven't seen the text of the agreement yet, one of the big questions will be around sanitary and phytosanitary measures, so SPS provisions that govern these sort of rules and regulations around agricultural trade, for example. It will depend on, do some of the tariff cuts, for example, are they linked to India having to meet certain UK standards before they can take advantage of sort of reduced tariffs on their exports into the UK? But I don't think it's probably likely that the UK government was willing to really negotiate on things like maximum residue levels for pesticides to facilitate that entry into the UK market. And ultimately, there were bigger things that India wanted out of the UK, I think, in terms of insisting on that in the deal.
So overall, would you say, should this be something that UK farmers should look positively at, this deal?
I think that there's actually a better balance of offensive interests for UK farmers to take advantage of in the agreement than worry about what's coming into the UK. So this is going to be one of those deals that actually there's a lot more wins, I think, for the agricultural sector than what we've seen in previous agreements.
Ali Renison. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Heather Simons. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.